Soft. That was the overwhelming sense that Sombra could feel in that moment. Everything about Fluttershy was soft. He let his hooves trail down her sides, and she shivered delightfully under his touch, and her wings spread out, only to wrap around the two of them, her primaries tracing down Sombra's back in turn. Her lips were like the softest velvet, and her whole body seemed to mold against him in an intoxicating manner. Then there was the kiss itself. There was passion, yes, but not a fiery, scorching passion. Rather, it was more steady and unyielding. Consistent, sweet, and deliciously addictive. When the kiss finally ended and the two parted, Sombra was pleased to see a faintly dazed look on Fluttershy's face. Her mouth was still just slightly open, lips parted and enticingly attractive. Fluttershy blinked a few times as she seemed to come to her senses. Sombra could feel the incoming storm as the buttercream mare's muscles tensed up in preparation for a panic attack. Sombra chose to forestall it by lifting a hoof and placing it over her muzzle. "Mouse, if you apologize for that, I'll be sincerely displeased," Sombra remarked dryly. Whatever it was that Fluttershy was about to respond was entirely lost. However, in the next moment, "Aw yeah, I knew it!" Both Sombra and Fluttershy turned to see Rainbow Dash standing in the doorway with 2 mugs of coffee in a holder on her back and a smug grin on her face. "You go, girl, get some of that!" Fluttershy, for her part, suddenly began doing her absolute best impersonation of a red delicious apple. She was blushing furiously, her ears pointed up and twitching distressedly, although her wings, Sombra noted with amusement, were only tightening their grip on him. After Rainbow had stopped laughing and set the coffee down, she turned to the mortified Fluttershy and gave her a more genuine, sincere smile. "Seriously, Flutters, good for you. You deserve a good guy," she said in a much softer voice, poking Fluttershy in the back with a hoof. "And since Cole came down here in the middle of the night, morning, whatever, and spent the last 8 hours making sure Scoots came through this crazy thing, okay, I don't think I even have to ask if he'll treat you right." Then he rounded on Sombra and pointed a hoof squarely at his muzzle. "I do have to say that if you ever hurt Fluttershy, I will definitely lodge my back hoof so far up your flank hole, you'll be tasting the last 3 asses I kicked in the rest of your life. Capiche?" "Duly noted," Sombra answered with a wry grin before turning to Fluttershy, who was still clinging to him like an adorable lamprey. "Fluttershy, as much as I do enjoy your proximity, I will at some point need my personal space to check on Scootaloo's vitals." Fluttershy squeaked something in a vague affirmation before detaching herself, albeit a bit grudgingly. She still remained within a hoof length of him, though, which Sombra had absolutely no issue with. Sorry, Cole, I wasn't thinking." Rainbow snorted a laugh. "Wow, if that's what you do when you stop thinking, we should get you to stop thinking more often. I only caught the tail end of that smooch-a-thon, and I can definitely tell Fluttershy started it. Never thought I'd say that." A small cough came from the bed, distracting all 3 of them. Sombra was next to Scootaloo more quickly than even Rainbow Dash. A few sparks of magic leapt from his horn and began orbiting around Scootaloo's body. Rainbow glanced worriedly at the dark stallion, then down to the orange filly, then back to Cole. Fluttershy simply stood stoically by Sombra's side as he did a few mental calculations. Letting out a relieved sigh, Sombra turned to Rainbow. "She's fine. Just getting used to the increased airflow and improved cardiopulmonary system. For all the danger she was in, her body has adapted to the magical influence of the infection quite majestically. See?" For the first time, Rainbow took in Scootaloo's physical state. The wider wings, the black feathers, the healthier shape of her body. For a moment, Rainbow Dash looked like she was going to cry as she turned to Cole. Did you do this?" Sombra was taken aback by the emotion in her voice, so much so that for a moment he was at a loss for words. When he found, he simply shrugged. "In part, I suppose, His explanation was forestalled by Twilight Sparkle entering the room, followed quickly by Rarity, Applejack, and last Pinkie Pie. "Cole, I didn't realize you were going to be here," Twilight said with a smile as the other 3 elements filed in behind her, and Sombra sketched a quick bow. "Did you come in with Flutter? Why are you wearing a doctor's coat?" Before either Sombra or Fluttershy could respond, Rainbow piped up. Because Cole's been here since like 3 in the morning doing his awesome weird crystal magic to help the squirt through whatever made her sick? The 4 new arrivals reacted with stunned silence, and Rarity was the first to recover. That's so wonderful, darling! The alabaster unicorn stepped gracefully forward, resting a hoof on Sombra's withers. You really are a good stallion, you know that? Sombra was about to respond when he felt Fluttershy tense against his side. He glanced down and saw her muzzle was scrunched up just slightly, and she was eyeing Rarity's hoof, which hadn't moved from where she'd laid it. The mouse is the jealous type. Who knew? Sombra noted with amusement. Shrugging, which had the additional effect of dislodging Rarity's hoof, Sombra just shook his head. When Fluttershy told me what happened, I knew she wouldn't be able to rest peacefully until the filly was back in good health. And I do know some ancient techniques that most doctors here in Equestria have had no reason to know. So, don't take this the wrong way, Mr. Amox. Applejack joined in the conversation finally. I'm mighty glad to hear that little Scootaloo's going to be okay. She's one of my sister's best friends. But you can't be denying a mute curiosity as to how you managed to cure her when all the doctors in Ponyville, along with our resident Alicorn princess, was plumb flummoxed. AJ, what the hey? Rainbow practically launched herself forward the few feet that had existed between the two mares. You make it sound like he planned this or something. He saved Scootaloo's life. And didn't mean it like that. Applejack backtracked quickly, holding up her hoofs placately. I just said I was curious. Y'all don't think it's a little odd? That's perfectly fair, Miss Apple, Cole responded before Rainbow could say anything more troublesome. As easy it was to get on her good side, she made something of an overzealous defender. I'm sure the thought was on more than just your mind. Am I right, Your Grace? Well, I wouldn't be much of a scientist if I wasn't, Twilight answered with a small laugh before turning to Applejack. You could have asked your question a little more tactfully, AJ. You've been up to Celestia knows how long trying to help. AJ looked down at the floor, scruffing her hoof on the tile. Ah, shucks. I reckon you're right, Twi. Turning to Sombra, Applejack held out a hoof. Sorry about that. Pardon again. I've always been a little mistrustful of outsiders, but you ain't been nothing but civil. Giving the farm mare a tired smile that, for once, he didn't have to bother faking, Sombra took a hoof and gave it a firm grip and shake. I understand completely. So you're going to explain? Twilight asked, a little too eager. She had several notebooks hovering near her, and so many quills, too. Sombra couldn't help but laugh a little at the sight. It was entirely endearing, if nothing else. I was under the impression you had managed to start your research project beyond the preliminary stages. Yes, that's correct, Sombra remarked, earning a few critical looks. That is, I haven't the slightest clue what kind of everfree plants could have affected this little one so badly. However, I know of a plant in the Crystal Empire that has similar symptoms. It's called Tyrant's Root. 3 guesses how it earned its name. Ooh, pick me! Pinky, mostly content with listening until now, was suddenly leaping up and down in the air, waving her hoofs. Is it because of the evil, nasty, wicked King Sombra? Sombra saw Fluttershy flinch slightly, but fortunately, every pony else was understandably distracted by Pinky. Yes, it was in fact. You see, the root has a unique effect that causes the pony Mirandians to become overreactive. You're gonna have to explain me or whatsits to the dumb farm pony over here, Applejack remarked, raising a hoof like she was in a classroom. Before Sombra or even Twilight could answer her, though, a bright voice piped up. Mirandians are the magical equivalent of arteries and veins in the pony's body, Pinky answered quickly, drawing several looks of undisguised shock. The pink conventioner continued unperturbed. They pull in magic from the outside and from food and stuff that the ponies eat. Use the magic for lots of stuff. Earth ponies use it to farm, Pegasi use it to make weather, and unicorns use it to cast spells and stuff. That's exactly right, Twilight said, flabbergasted. Where'd you learn that? Pinky just grinned. From my Granny Pie. She taught Oz Pie fillies. Earth pony magic is how rock farms can create crystals inside the rocks. We focus our magic into our hoofs and then push it into the rocks. When the inside of the rocks absorbs, it becomes all crystal-y. That's why we have to make sure we rotate all the rocks regularly, though, so the crystals on the inside grow evenly. I was never very good at it, though, but Maud is super duper good at it, better than even my pops. Well, Rarity said, blinking in surprise, I suppose that's a bit of friendship lesson there, isn't it, darling? She said, turning to Twilight. Sometimes even your closest friends can still surprise you. Yeah, I guess so, Twilight answered with a smile before looking over at Sombra. Sorry about the interruption. You were explaining about the tyrant's root? Coughing to clear his throat, Sombra nodded. Yes, the root was used by Lord Sombra to infuse his most loyal and zealous warriors and servants with greater power. You see, the root causes ponies' mandarins to draw in so much magic it becomes toxic to their bodies, overwhelming them completely. As part of the root's life cycle, you see, beasts or ponies who consume the root die of either magical overload or massive organ failure. Then the remains of the root grow within the body and become a new plant. Sombra used small amounts to make unstoppable warriors and unparalleled sorcerers out of his followers. Those few who survived, that is. Mortality rate, I understand, was horrifically high. Holy crap! Rainbow muttered. Scoots ate that? Sombra shook his head. No, not at all. I suspect it was some distant relative of the tyrant root, though. Everfree, being a wildly magical place, probably had a plant that thrives off the magical influx in the similar manner as the root. Most likely she was hungry and attempted to eat something that had been looked palatable. That's how parasitic plants evolve, after all. They draw on victims with sweet sense or taste. Twilight was nodding along with everything, her expression becoming grim at the end. You're not wrong. I wouldn't be surprised if a plant like that existed in the Everfree Forest. It is a really dangerous place, after all. So, how did you heal her without knowing what she ate? Quite simple, Sombra remarked. Since the tyrant root functions by overloading the pony's body with magic, I simply use my magic to create crystalline conducts like this. A spark of red magic drifted up from his horn and concealed into a perfectly hexagonal crystal matrix, and then used them to siphon out the excess magic that was poisoning her system, before allowing it to disperse harmlessly. Since the build-up stopped a few hours ago, I've been spending the rest of the time ensuring that there was no damage to her organs or muscles. That's brilliant! Twilight smiled brightly as she noted down Sombra's words. How did you get the magic to safely unbind from her blood, though? That's what stopped me from trying the same thing. I didn't, Sombra responded, drawing a look of surprise from the Lavador alicorn. I just waited for the magic to unbind itself from her blood when it was preparing to transfer to her organs and muscles. Once it was free from the blood, I intercepted the particles with my crystals. After all, why try to force something that would occur naturally? Sombra suppressed a smug grin at the look of disbelief on the princess's face, as it slowly turned into one of self-replication. Of course, that's so simple! How could I have not thought of that? Twilight's notepad and quill floated down to the floor as she scowled, her face down as she stared at the space between her hoofs. You're centuries too young to try and best my sorcery, Miss Sparkle, Sombra thought to himself. A small nudge from Fluttershy drew his attention away from his thoughts, and back to the buttercream mare beside him. She was looking at him with a pleading gaze that nodded her head towards Twilight, who was still looking despondent. Sombra flicked his ears in irritation. Oh, very well, if I must. Your Grace, Sombra said softly, drawing the attention of the 5 other mares who were consoling Twilight with looks of success. In all fairness, it was hardly an obvious solution, nor is it one I would expect an equestrian-trained mage to even think of, let alone execute. Crystal magic specializes in the transference of energy between points of access, from pony to crystal and back again, for instance. Even had you identified the weakness of the deflection, there's no guarantee you could have safely siphoned off the arcane particles. I have had decades of training in the skull magic. That is the simple truth. Centuries more like it, but I can hardly say that now, can I? Sombra chuckled inwardly, turning his head to regard Fluttershy. He felt a warmth grow in his chest as the radiant smile she was wearing, a smile that was directed entirely at him. Cole's right, Sugar Cube, Applejack said sternly. You can't be expected to be able to cast magic you ain't even heard of. Sombra gave a supporting nod. If it helps too, my diagnosis suggests that her life was never in mortal danger. I can't say what would have happened, but I can say with almost certainty That she would survive the ordeal. Whatever she consumed must have been in small enough quantities to avoid any dire side effects. That, or the equestrian strain, is simply less potent than the tyrant root. It may have evolved to affect wildlife rather than the more complex system of a pony. It did way more than affect her, Rainbow said, interrupting. Seriously, check it out. Carefully, Rainbow pulled the covers away from Skulu to reveal the wide, dark-feathered wings and lean, athletic form. If anything, Skulu was starting to look like Rainbow Dash, in fact, so long as whoever was making the comparison ignored the colors of the two mares. Twilight stared in wonder, and Rarity nudged herself closer. Oh my stars, her coloration is beautiful! Rarity whispered. Sombra hadn't really given the Phelan's appearance much thought, but since Rarity brought it up, he had to admit the combination of black and orange created a striking combination of colors that evoked the image of the very last moments of sunset, the last whispers of the orange sun before the day is swallowed by the shadow of night. Sombra opened his mouth to say something, but his voice was lost as he staggered in place. Damnation, I persisted too long. Sombra inwardly cursed himself for his folly. He had exhausted himself when he full well knew he could ill afford it. I need rest and food. In the dimness of his consciousness, Sombra heard Fluttershy speak up. Oh dear, I should help get Cole home. He pushed himself to exhaustion. Can someone stay with Skulu in case she wakes up? The world was fading in and out. He felt an unpleasant numbness in his extremities. Lean against me, Cole. We're going home. Home? Yes. Sombra's thoughts moved like they were submerged in syrup. Going home. It had been a struggle getting Sombra back to the cottage. It took almost an hour, but Fluttershy knew it would have been simply harder if he had been in his true form. It had been a little difficult excusing herself from their friends, especially from Twilight offering her castle or Rainbow trying to help Fluttershy with the trip. She didn't want to risk his spell failing when anyone else could see. Fortunately, Fluttershy had been able to explain away her reluctance, so she felt another small pang of guilt that she had taken advantage of her friend's trust in her. This, however, she knew would have been implied by the guise, whether she would have wanted to protect him or not. Throughout it all, she had felt the telltale pressure in her mind driving her to get her king to safety. Not that she needed it any more. The thought passed through her head without the usual vitriol, surprisingly. Well, a few things have changed recently, she thought, remembering the passionate kiss they shared before Dash had interrupted them. A blush turned her face scarlet, as her fur only highlighting the shade. Carefully, Fluttershy moved Sombra, who was in a kind of sleepwalking vague state, into the living room and maneuvered him around the dining table and toward the hallway. It was around that point that she felt him getting heavier. For a moment, she thought that she was imagining it, but a quick glance told her there was no illusion, or rather it was. Cole Amox was fading away, leaving behind the towering form of King Abra Sombra. Oh shoot, there he goes. Fluttershy thought quickly as she began moving with a little more speed toward his room. Every step was more laborious than the last, though, as Sombra's frame took on its usual weight and immensity. She barely got him through the door to his room before the transformation complete. The sudden and jarring end to the change caused Fluttershy to catch her hoof on Sombra's tail, which had gotten caught between them when she turned him to enter the room. And with a small eep, Fluttershy collapsed as the unconscious weight of the king bore her to the floor. Even when she had moved him before, she had never really apprehended how heavy King Sombra really was. Not that he was overweight or anything, she quickly reminded herself, but the sheer volume of muscle he possessed dwarfed estimation. Now, however, she was painfully aware of his full weight as it pressed down on her. Oh dear, this is not good, Fluttershy thought privately. Her wings had fortunately been pinned to her sides when she fell. She didn't want to think what Sombra's full weight against her outstretched wings would have felt like. As it was, she was pinned beneath him, laying on her right side with Sombra's frame draped over her. Maybe if I can lift, I can get... Nope. Well, if I can just squirm forward, I might be able to... Oh, fudge. She had managed to get her top half mostly out from beneath his barrel, but now her legs were pinned and she couldn't get them free. She was positioned directly between his forelegs, which was curled in enough to catch her shoulders, and no amount of wiggling was letting her get free. That unless she wanted to risk damaging her legs. Fluttershy carefully moved her legs around, ensuring they had some movement so the circulation wouldn't cut off. "Well, here I am," Fluttershy said, softly to no pony in particular. "I suppose this is where I'm staying for the time being. I guess it could be worse. I wonder." Cautiously, Fluttershy unfolded her wings just enough to get her primaries loose. It took a few minutes, but eventually she was able to maneuver them out of the crook of Sombra's foreleg. Bracing herself for Sombra moving, Fluttershy could only hope that he didn't damage her wing, albeit unintentionally. Sucking in a breath and then slowly letting it out, Fluttershy gently slid her feathers against the sensitive skin. Sombra twitched, and Fluttershy tensed for a moment, hoping she didn't just made an awful decision. Fortunately, Sombra's movement caused him to shift just slightly to the right, ensuring that Fluttershy was able to free her legs. Before she could fully escape, however, Sombra's forelegs tucked in, catching the small mare and pulling her to his chest. The grip wasn't ironclad, or even partially strong if Fluttershy was being honest. Now Sombra was on his side, cradling Fluttershy against him, and with a rush of embarrassment, she realized that she had managed to accidentally make herself the little spoon to Sombra's very, very big spoon. "I can get out easily, I think," Fluttershy mused as she tested her hypothesis by pushing against one of his forelegs, which was enclosing her. Sure enough, they had about as much give as a turnstile in the Ponyville train station. "But I don't really want to. This is comfortable." The thought brought a fresh blush to her face, followed by the resigned sigh. "I can't just leave him on the floor, though. That's not right, even if he wasn't a king. I'm comfy, but I'm sure he'll be stiff and sore when he wakes up if I leave him this way." Grudgingly, she pried herself free of Sombra's grip and maneuvered herself back into the position on his right side. Lifting him up, she pushed forward a last couple meters to his bed, gently moving him onto it. Fluttershy couldn't help but smile at the success she had trotted back to the kitchen and fixed herself some lunch. It had been a tiring journey, and she felt exhausted. After a quick meal of apples and cheese, Fluttershy sat at the table considering what had happened this morning. "When I thought about reforming him, this wasn't exactly what I had in mind," she mused as a wry grin turned her lips up. "I guess I can't really complain. He may have made me help him, but this was my choice, even if it wasn't a good choice." There was that. No matter which way she cut it, Fluttershy had to face the fact that she had some kinds of feelings for Sombra. King Sombra, the Crystal Tyrant and Lord of Shadows. Of all ponies she could have fallen for, she knew she was probably the bottom of the list in terms of good choices. There was plenty of other stallions in Ponyville alone. Blue Note, Time Turner, Caramel, they were all good ponies. She was supposed to fall for a pony with a good heart, or any pony but Sombra. So why was it that every time she thought about his eyes, burning with emerald fire and crimson light, her heart started doing flips? Why did his deep, threatening baritone excite her instead of frighten her away? Every part of her mind was telling her this was a bad idea. Fluttershy let out another sigh. She was doing that a lot lately since the master had come into her life. "I suppose I might as well get my evening chores out of the way. Even though it's early, I don't have much else to do." The day was sunny and pleasant, much more so now that Fluttershy didn't have the weight of Skulu's fate hanging over her like the sword of Demorlis. Her animal friends seemed to have gotten used to Sombra's presence, as they no longer hiding in their dens and burrows. It had only been a few days, but already they were treating him like part of the household. Though Fluttershy had an odd sense of comfort, animals. She had long ago learned had a sense all their own and that ponies often ignored. An animal could sense disaster hours, sometimes days before it happened. They instinctively knew when danger is near, then as well. The fact that they seemed mostly at ease with Sombra was promising in a strange sense of word. It only took a few hours, and soon Fluttershy was back in the house. She felt drained, like the last several hours had taken out an order of magnitude more than their toll. Turning her head, she sniffed at herself and scrunched her muzzle at the scent. "I definitely need a bath." Trotting into her room, she turned on her back hoof and stepped into her master bathroom, one of the few amenities she had spent more bits on than she was comfortable disclosing. Lingering in her open bath, under the hot water with fresh scented bubbles around her, was one of her favorite ways to unwind. Turning the spout, she hummed in satisfaction as the steam rising from the filling tub. Working quickly, she added the bubble mixture and scented oils before setting out a large towel to the side. As soon as the tub was filled nearly to the brim, Fluttershy cracked the spout off. Taking a tentative step into the water, she hissed in pleasure as the heat sank into her tired legs. Careful not to cause a spill, she stepped fully into the tub and settled down, letting the water caress her flanks and withers, rising up over her wings and back to touch her chin. She wasn't sure how long she'd relax in the hot water, but eventually to begin the laborious task of scrubbing away the sweat of the day from her fur and mane, preening her wings and combing her tail. It was early evening by the time she stepped out of the tub and dried off, the water slicing away the daily grime away with the pipes. Far from feeling awakened, though, Fluttershy felt lethargic. Oh my, I guess today was more exciting than I thought. Fluttershy walked out of her room and down the hall into the kitchen for a snack. I guess I'll make an early night of it. I should lay out some food for His Majesty, though. He'll probably be ravenous when he wakes up. Gathering some less perishable food, mostly fruit and cheese along with slices of bread, Fluttershy carried the platter to Sombra's room and laid it on the nightstand. A long, heavy yawn escaped Fluttershy's mouth, threatening to send her straight off to dreamland right there. Sombra was right where she had left him, a thought that brought more comfort than it ought to have, and the sight of his slow, steady breathing had a startling, soporific effect. Then an idea crossed Fluttershy's tired brain, an idea that, had she been fully awake, she might have dismissed, entirely out of hoof. I wonder if His Majesty would mind if I just... A blush crept over her face at the thought of what she was about to do, but her tired brain wasn't in the mood to try and offer any counter-argument. Before she could think better of her idea, Fluttershy had lifted herself onto the bed and lay down with her back to Sombra. Making sure not to disturb the sleeping king, she scooted back until she was in the same position she'd been in that afternoon. Sombra's sleeping form seemed entirely fine with the idea, as his forelegs closed over her in the same manner as before. Using her wings, Fluttershy lifted the blanket and pulled it over them both, snuggling into the king. No, not the king. Her king. Yes, Fluttershy thought as she drifted off. That sounds much better.